Do you need to work with a developmental editor in order to land a literary agent and get a traditional book deal? And why should you pay an editor if you get an editor for free after you get your book deal? Where do you find an editor? How do you choose one? How much do they cost? When should you work with one? These are questions I get all of the time, so today I'm going to answer all of them and tell you more about my experience working with my editor. And if we haven't met already, hi, I'm Lauren. I'm a young adult author and mom based in Brooklyn. My debut young adult novel, We Ship It, came out last June with HarperCollins, and I absolutely love sharing advice and free resources with writers to help you get your story out into the world. So first, before I go into anything, I just want to say, no one needs to work with an editor. Plenty of writers have become published authors without spending a penny on editing or anything else. And it's a huge responsibility that I have making videos and giving advice to writers from all over the world with all different backgrounds. And I never want anyone to feel like they are at a disservice if they can't afford to bring on an editor. You absolutely do not need to work with one. At the same time, I think it's a disservice to writers to not talk openly about money and when it can be helpful to bring on an editor if you can afford to work with one. I feel like whenever we talk about money, it's seen as a taboo, but I think it's really important to put this information out there openly and honestly. And for me, I did bring in an editor because I was working in a completely different career path, working on my startups, and writing was new to me. So I didn't have some fancy writing background. I didn't spend like $60,000 on an MFA, and I wanted to make this my career. So I saw it as a really worthwhile investment, just like investing in coding bootcamp to become an engineer or getting an advanced degree to become a teacher. This is a real career and job, and I wanted to invest in my education to give myself the very best chance of making this a financial viability as a career path. And at the end of the day, it worked out. I invested a few $1,000s into working with two amazing editors over the course of a few years as a book coach, helping me with outlining, brainstorming, developmental editing, and then also some line edits. And I ended up getting 8 offers from literary agents and a 6-figure 2-book deal. So for me, this really paid off. And I also just think this helped me get that book deal a lot faster. Like, could I have done this without working with an editor? Sure, but it might have taken many more years. And so in the end, that would have cost me more money because that would have been a lot more years that I would spend writing and not making a penny off of my writing. That being said, an editor, I always put this out there, is no guarantee you're going to get a literary agent or a book deal. An editor is an investment in your education. They help you level up. So if you are starting at a level 4, that editor can help you get to a level 5. But you need to be at a level 10 out of 10 in this really, really competitive industry in order to even stand a shot with agents or at getting a traditional book deal. So if you're at a 4, the editor probably isn't going to get you to that 10 anytime soon, but it's a really great way to improve by working with a professional and just learning all the things that you don't know about yourself as a writer and also about your story. So if you don't have the budget right now to work with an editor, that is completely okay. There are so many ways to grow and improve as a writer, but you really want to make sure that you're getting feedback on your writing and learning and growing as a writer. So check out the description below for my free toolkit on my favorite craft books that I think every fiction writer should read, and also on ways to connect with critique partners. That is a fantastic way to improve as a writer, get feedback, and get your story to the next level. All right, so the big question, why should you pay an editor if you're going to get an editor for free once you get a book deal? So this comes down to understanding what developmental editors do versus what editors do once you have a book deal. Now, this depends on what publisher you're with and if you're a lead title or not lead title, but in general, the kind of editing that you are getting once you have that book deal is proofreading. And they're like going through word for word. They're doing some line edits too, but this is on a really technical basis. They're generally not like completely rearranging your book or making any big edits. They want your book 99% done. Like, this is a great story. It's commercial. It's edited. It's a competitive industry. So they want a book like that could basically be on the shelves, and they're going through, and for my book, it was like Celeste Pizza. They were doing like very impressive, super thorough, like, do we capitalize the C or is it lowercase? They had this whole list of every single term I used in the book, and it was like Gilmore Girls, Celeste Pizza. I don't know, it was a funny list, but it was really, really, really nitpicky, right? Those aren't the sorts of edits that you need to be doing on your own before you pitch. You want the bigger picture edits. You want to make sure you have a commercial story, a really, really great book to even stand a chance with agents and editors. So first, I want to talk about what editors actually do. So there are many different types of editing. There's line editing, copy editing, proofreading, developmental editing, editorial assessments. The list goes on. So the developmental editor is coming in and doing more big picture edits. How's your plot structure? Are you hitting the right plot beats for the story and for your genre? How's your character development? Do things make sense in the story? Are there any plot holes and how do we fix them? Do all of the resolutions for the A story and the B story make sense? Are they satisfying for the reader? Is this a commercially viable book? And if not, what changes should we make? So bigger picture things like that occasionally they'll help you with after you have that book deal, but usually you need to resolve yourself either through working with an editor or through self-editing and working with critique partners before you're going to get an agent or editor interested in your book. So for me, the main editor that I worked with, Jennifer, was awesome. And there were so many things that she helped me with, even just outside of those big picture edits. So once I was done writing my first book and I'd gotten my agents, I thought I was all done. I have another video on that. And I sent Jennifer an email being like, it's time for book number 2. And one of the very best things that Jennifer helped me with was sort of like helping me come back down to earth. And she was like, Lauren, this isn't book 2. You haven't sold book 1. You got an agent, but you haven't sold it. And that was very helpful advice because I was sort of going in like, I'm agented. Book 2 just will flow out. And she was like, no, you have to really sit and think just as hard about book 2, maybe even harder than book 1. And so in just a few days, she helped me brainstorm it. She actually, without even realizing it, inspired me because we're both Broadway fans. And she'd sent me something Broadway related was going on during the pandemic, and I watched it. And that led to me just sitting like all night listening to Rent. And then I just had the idea for We Ship It. And then she helped me flesh that out just through like a few emails and a phone call. And that was the book that led to my 6-figure book deal. So in addition to helping me with outlining and brainstorming, what was probably the most helpful aspect of working with Jennifer was that she helped me to not give up. So I have other videos on this, but she just wrote me this letter that I hold so dearly that I have like printed out and I read all the time and I've shared with tons of writers. When I was at my lowest point, I thought my writing was complete garbage. I would never get an agent or a book deal. And I told her I was giving up, and she emailed me back just the most amazing letter that really helped me not give up. And it was only a few months later that I ended up getting an agent, and I would have quit like a few feet away from the finish line, but I just didn't know where it was. And it is really, really difficult being a writer, right? Like this is such a hard job, and our writing is so sensitive and vulnerable. And so partnering with the right editor can just be so life-changing. You know, they can help not just educate you, but give you the confidence to keep going. So I have shared that story a lot, and one of the top questions I get from writers is, where do you even find an editor? And I actually didn't know what to tell writers. So in my very early days on TikTok, I was just giving everyone Jennifer's info, and she's very kind, but like most editors can only work with 1 or 2, maybe 3 or 4 writers a month. So she was quickly booked up. And I didn't know what to do, so I did what I tend to, which is I go overboard, and I set up an entire agency of the most fantastic editors and people, and I've started matching writers with editors over the last month. It's been super, super rewarding. It's such a rock star team of editors who have experience as editors at Big 5 publications, published authors, and just like really good people. Like that's what I screen for. A lot of people might have the technical skills, but you also really have to have the people skills to know how to handle such delicate work, right? A lot of times editors are the first people laying eyes on a story that has lived in someone for years. So I really, really screen through a ton of people to find just the most amazing humans to join my team. That said, there are many ways to find editors outside of my agency, so make sure to do your research. And I also get asked all the time, how much does it cost to work with an editor? So that's sort of like asking how much does it cost to buy a home, from a little to a lot. I guess a home is always a lot to even more a lot. When it comes to working with an editor, they are generally reading through your whole book and writing an editorial letter, and that takes many, many hours, and they are professionals. So that comes out to, let's say for a 60,000 word book, ballpark minimum, usually around $1,000. Now, there's always going to be outliers and sometimes like newer editors to the field who will do it for less. But if you're thinking about working with a true professional who has edited tons and tons of books, they come up with their quotes on a per word basis. So it'll go up from there. But 60,000 words, I would say would be hard to find an editor for under 1,000. But also it depends on the level of edit you're getting. So an editorial assessment is generally one read through and then an editorial report that the editor writes up after. So that is going to be less of an investment than a full developmental edit. Usually the editor is reading your book at least twice and also writing some inline comments as they read in addition to their report. Okay, so next writers ask me, how do I decide which editor to work with and to hand my work over to? So I always recommend looking at least a few different options. Definitely getting on a call with the editor and talking with them. This is a really important relationship, so go with your gut and see how you feel after one or two conversations. And then also look at what books they've edited in the past. Definitely try to work with an editor who has real experience with your genre and understands the tropes or the plot points that you need to hit. Someone could be a top editor, let's say with romance. They might not be the right editor, let's say if you're working on a memoir. All right, next, writers ask, when should they bring in an editor? Like right when they're starting or when they've taken the book as far as they've gotten? And the answer is, an editor can be helpful at any time. If you have a smaller budget, I always say you're going to get the most out of bringing in an editor when you've taken your book as far as you can get it. So work with critique partners, work with beta readers, do multiple rounds of edits, make it the very, very best book you can make it. It's so good, you probably think it's ready for agents. Maybe it is, maybe you want to query a few and see, but it is really competitive. So 9 times out of 10, an editor will help it get to that next level, but you are going to get the most out of your investment if you've taken it as far as you can. Now let's say you're super busy. Maybe you are a full-time parent or a full-time professional. You've saved up the money to invest, but you just don't have the time. And maybe you also need the accountability. So at that point, it might make sense to bring in an editor who's working as a book coach. So that's what I did with Jennifer. I wanted to have deadlines to meet. I wanted someone I could just talk to anytime I had a new idea. It probably annoyed the heck out of her, but she was great. And so, you can work with someone on a monthly basis who reviews sections at a time. And this may, in the long run, add up to more, but I think it also makes your journey a lot more streamlined because you're sort of writing in the right direction and you don't go on a tangent or just start working on a book that might not be commercial at all. And then you spend years and years working on it only to work with an editor who's like, ooh, actually, I know that these types of books don't sell. So it can definitely be beneficial to bring someone in earlier, but you, of course, don't need to do that. And if you have a small budget, I would recommend just working with a developmental editor on the very final draft or like as far as you can take it where you yourself don't know what edits to make. So I hope this helps to give you more of an understanding of what developmental editors actually do and whether you work with one or not. Best of luck on getting your story out into the world.